Hi, I'm Andrea Johnston, entrepreneur, communications leader, and a believer in the power of women and the unlimited potential in all of us. On Women I Want You to Know, we shine a light on real women who are breaking barriers, blazing new trails, and redefining what leadership looks like. These are real conversations about ambition, drive, difficult choices, and impact, the kind you won't hear anywhere else. Because every woman's story has the power to propel another from dream to reality. This is Women I Want You to Know. Hey everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Women I Want You to Know. And I am so excited to introduce you to Trisha Price. Trisha is the Chief Product Officer at Pendo.io, and she is a widely recognized leader in software product development and tech. And she's a featured speaker. She's also a podcast host, and she's really an incredible woman that I want you to know. She got her undergraduate degree at NC State, went on to get her master's at Harvard. She is a boy mom of 2, and she loves the outdoors. Welcome, Trisha.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm so excited to be here today.
I am so happy to have you here. And before we dive in, I thought it'd be kind of fun to reminisce about when we actually met for the first time in person. Trisha and I are both big fans of the Girls Leadership Academy of Wilmington, which is a local educational program directed toward under-resourced women. And so we actually met on a party bus with our husbands to a fundraiser to benefit Glow. And it was an incredible night, but I'll never forget when we were going around the party bus introducing ourselves. And I'm like, oh my God, you're Trisha Price. I have heard so much about you.
Oh, and I felt the same way. We have women who have worked on our teams and we've worked with that we share in common had been saying for years, like, you two have to know each other and be friends. And thanks to the Glow Party Bus, we are and have just so appreciated our friendship and how we support each other in work and life since the fateful day on the Glow Party Bus.
Yes, well, right back at you. And so glad we get to learn more about your story and share with the women in our community more about your journey. So I'd love to actually start with diving a little bit into your journey. I mean, how did you get into the C suite in this male dominated world of tech? What was that journey like? Walk us through a little bit.
Andrea, I feel like I've always known and understood that I've been one of the few women in the room, but I've never really processed or allowed it to stop or impact the way I thought about my own career and opportunities. But I think a big part of that is I've always made the choice to work for companies and work for leaders that had the same mindset as me. And I've pretty much mostly worked for men, but, the CEO of the company when I came to work there, but I've chosen companies that I knew wanted a woman at the table, wanted me at the table. And so I've always not been afraid to advocate for myself, and I've always been very intentional about the choice of who I work for, both the person as well as the company. I think when you go back to my career journey, I've made very intentional choices over time about working really, really hard, being really gritty. I think now in my career, I can probably lean on intuition and experience and not just grit and outworking everyone else, but I would probably never have had the opportunities that I have now had I not done that early in my career. And I think that's just an intentional choice I made along the way that gave me the opportunities to then make the choice to go to work for the right companies.
And it's interesting because when I look at the journey that you've taken, you've also worked for really large, kind of classic corporate America style companies. And then you've also been in the startup realm. So, sort of, how did that happen? And what have you learned from the different environments in which you've worked?
I like to tell people, and I know you share this same feeling, your life has seasons of things that you have to prioritize or you can choose to prioritize. And earlier in my career, I worked for larger enterprises, and that was a season. And I did that because I felt like the things I wanted to learn about being a leader, about leading large teams, about how successful large companies operate I needed to go to work for those type companies. I also worked for those type companies when I was in the season of having babies, because that is a season and it's a difficult time to balance everything. And I felt a little more supported and ability to be successful in those types of companies when I was going through that season. But after I came out of that season, and when I say came out, I mean like the babies were like 1 year old, I was ready to bet on myself. I had the confidence that, my first few years of experience had taught me what I needed to do, and I was ready to take risk and go for it. And so at that point, I switched gears and have primarily worked for startup to mid-size scaling since then.
And it's so interesting because I think your point about seasons is such a good one, as is your point about what you can learn in a larger organization early in your career, where you can get training and skills development and even leadership development that serves you so well when you want to go into a smaller, more nimble environment that doesn't necessarily have all that infrastructure and training in place.
Absolutely. And they paid for parts of my graduate degree, right? So, I mean, the very first job I took out of college, they put me through a leadership development multi-year program, taught us tons and invested in us in a way that a small startup never can. And I've learned wildly different and equally important things working for those startups, but I think it was a good choice for me early in my career.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I'm so grateful that I had the chance to work for big Fortune 500 companies early because it really does give you a certain amount of training and an investment, as you said, in your career that you may not get elsewhere. But then also the entrepreneurial startup, that fast pace, that adrenaline, there is something really special and a lot you learn in that environment as well. So, no, that's awesome. When you think about that season, as you called it, with, having kids, you're still in the season of raising kids and preparing them for adulting, which in your case isn't too far away. Talk to me and our listeners about that journey as a working mom.
I am grateful, and I think you and I have this in common, and I know we immediately connected over it, that I have an incredibly supportive husband. And I do think your partner and picking your partner is critical in your success and your journey. That really radically changed my ability to travel, to go for it. I can remember times where I had been traveling for 4 or 5 days, come home, get a text from CEO, "Hey, can you make it to this dinner tonight? We've got a customer in town or a great candidate in town." And I never thought twice about it because Scott, I knew he was there for the kids. It was never a question, right? About whether or not they were well loved and taken care of. And so that really allowed me to go all in. And I'm not saying that's the right choice for everybody, but it certainly was the right choice for us. And I think it allowed me to not second guess missing things and feel quite as guilty about some of those choices that I had to make when they were little. And that really continues, right? Like, even as they get to middle school and high school, and they may not need you to put their shoes on and their coats on and give them rides anymore, you still it's important and helpful to have someone there to see when they've had bad days and good days. And so we've managed that by Scott being primarily home and supporting them. I mean, now at this point in my career, I do have a bit more freedom to be there for them. But now I always joke as a mom, it's kind of like being like the needy girlfriend. Like they don't really want to be with you. And so you just like hang around all the time in hopes that somebody like pays attention to you for a hot minute. That's about all I get anymore, to be honest with you. So, but, it is a different time in life for me with high school age kids for sure.
Yeah. But I think they also need you, right, on a different level too. Like, you're also a great strategic sounding board. They can come to you for advice. And as they're getting ready for what's ahead with college, there's so much of a evolution, I think, that takes place with the relationships with our kids as they get into different phases for themselves too. And I love the point you made about having a supportive spouse because I think sometimes I don't recognize that as much as my husband deserves the recognition because it is so important. Like, we couldn't do what we do without their support and their willingness to focus on what matters at home.
And I think for us, I mean, you make no mistake, like you will miss things if you're trying to go for it with your career. And the person who that hurts is not really your children. If you have a good support system set up, it's you, right? Like there's many, many times I've been sad. I can remember I was at a board meeting in New York and we finished the board meeting and my kid called and said he had gotten the Triangle Award at their school, which is the highest award for middle school students because it's academic, it's like citizenship, and it's character. It's like all three pieces of the puzzle in one. And I missed that because I missed middle school graduation. Now, my husband was there. My son didn't care. He was just excited to call me and tell me after he got the award because I think you're teaching them this is actually the sacrifices you have to make if you want this type of career. And if you don't, that's okay. But if you do, you don't always get your cake and eat it too. And I'm glad we've taught the children that as a message. And I'm glad Scott was there to be there to celebrate it. But I cried. I mean, it was so hard for me to have missed that moment. And so that's been another thing that for me is very important to acknowledge for people I mentor who work for me, which is you are going to miss things and it is going to be hard for you.
I think that's such an important point too, because it's oftentimes that sacrifice or that trade-off that we feel, and it's really, I don't wanna say all about us, but in a way it is all about us because our kids are gonna be just fine, and if they have that strong community and support network around them, it's more about us feeling guilty and us feeling badly that we couldn't be there. But, I think you said that so well, and I do think it's important for women to understand that there are trade-offs, but that doesn't mean your kids aren't gonna be any less thriving or successful, and sometimes we have to give ourselves permission not to feel so guilty and constantly feel like we have to be all things to all people. That's the whole point of being a team, right, as a family, so we can all have the support and the help. So, no, I love the way you framed that. Tell me about going for a job that you may feel is unattainable. Maybe you feel like it's slightly out of reach, but you kinda have that mindset of, like, you gotta go for it. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, if I look back to coming to Encino, that's a job I went for sure. I mean, I was the GM of a business that had just sold and was probably about the same size as Encino was at that time. So one could say I was well positioned to come in and be the chief product officer. But Encino was on a different growth trajectory with a different level of investment. But like it never even crossed my mind, Andrea, whether I was prepared for that job or not. I knew I was prepared for that job. I knew I could do that job well. And I knew I could help take the company to the next level of growth, including the IPO, which we did. And so for me, going for that job that you're not 100% prepared for. What job are you 100% prepared for? I mean, even if you've done the job somewhere else, the team dynamic is different. There's always something, and nobody is perfectly prepared for any job. But are you willing to put the work in and learn things that you haven't seen before? Are you coming in confident and excited with an attitude of like, what I don't know, I will learn. When I'm unsure, I will ask. Where I may be weak, I will hire. And if you can come into a position with that attitude, you'll probably get the job.
I think sometimes, again, this is an area where we are our own worst enemy, and if you have the skills and the capability, in fact, most jobs that you should be going for next should be a level up from where you are today, right? That's the whole point.
Yeah. Right. Right. Unless you're purposefully taking a sidestep or step back, if you want to use that word, which there are reasons to do that at points in your career. You should be going for it. And I hate that I hear and see sometimes that women are less likely to go for a job because one bullet point or one qualification, they hear that they're not, every single checklist. Nobody's ever ready with every single thing in a checklist. And good employees and especially good leaders aren't great because they have everything in a checklist. They're great because they know what they're good at. They're ready to double down on it and they know how to go hire and attract talent for the things they're not great at. And that's what makes you an amazing leader. And so go in with that confidence, go in with that plan.
I love that. I also want to hear a little bit about your amazing podcast, which I have to say, I love the name of Hard Calls, and would love to hear also about some of the hard calls you've had to make as a leader. So tell us about the podcast. Tell us about your own hard calls.
I love, like, the roles are flipped for me
Yeah,
today.
today you get
And
to
now
be
you
the
get to ask
leader.
me about the hard calls that I've had to make. I came up with Hard Calls as the name of the podcast for a couple reasons. One, and I think this is true for most people in leadership, but I feel like in particular when you're running product, sales thinks they know what every customer needs. The CEO knows what the company strategy is. Your chief customer success officer, if you have that role, knows voice of customer. So everybody sort of feels like they know what the product roadmap and product investment and the strategy should be. But as the CPO, you're the one accountable and you got all these opinions, yet you're the one who has to make the hard call. And I think that concept of hard calls is applicable regardless of your role, but in a leadership position. By the time you get to an executive type position or leadership position, that is what you're getting paid to do is make hard calls day in and day out. And so I felt like starting every episode with whoever we have on talking about a hard call would be really fun, but then having them spend time throughout the episode of how do they make hard calls? Is it about hiring the right people? Is it about having data? Is it about having intuition and pattern matching? Like, what are all the things that we as leaders have as tools in our toolkit to make those hard calls and then to be able to share them with other people to lean on?
So tell me, in your experience, what was one of the hardest calls you've had to make as a leader?
There's a couple. I think if we're being honest with ourselves, usually moving on from people is the hardest call we have to make. And I know you have too had to do that several times. And, people that we care about, people that are really good at their job, people that have been with the company for a long, long time, sometimes since day one. And yet they got us from 0 to 10, but aren't gonna get us from 10 to 100, and having to either let that person go or move them into a different type role where they can be effective, but not sort of blocking that 10 to 100 growth, and I've had to do that several times. I try to do that in a way that's very human, and I also try to think about the fact that it's good for that person too, because if they're in the wrong role, it's gotta be frustrating when you can't be successful and you can't meet expectations. But I think that is, in general, the hardest call because nobody wants to negatively impact someone else's career or life. And so that I think is generally the hard one. When it comes to like a technology decision, hard calls are typically more like looking at the trade-offs and can be a little more data and pattern matching. We at Pendo, I'll just give you an example from about a year ago. Maybe this is probably 2 years ago, AI, LLMs trying to make tons of room for AI in our roadmap. But I mean, we have a full roadmap of things to do that our customers need and that we need to drive growth. And we had these two different products and they were on two different sort of technology stack front ends. And that meant different teams were working on each one of them. And I knew we could consolidate them and put them on one front end and free up teams to work on AI. But you got to bite the bullet and make the work to bring the functionality over. And that's a hard decision to make. And it was one we kept punting because we were just like, man, that's work we're doing that's not taking things forward. But I made that call and it was the best decision we ever made because especially as AI has continued to grow as a part of our strategy, now we can build that infrastructure and AI features one time, not in two different experiences. And so it's really panned out for us. But those kinds of decisions are hard to make.
Yeah, I mean, it's goes back to all about being about those trade-offs and about making the difficult decisions, whether it's investment and finance related or people related. But to your point, that's part of leadership too. And it's the ownership over those decisions and the accountability. Doesn't make them any easier, but it is what they are. I'm also curious, Trisha, given that you've moved around a lot, you are the chief product officer of a company that's based in a different town than you live in. A lot of people today are still working remote, but I think struggling with how to remain relevant and connected when so many people are back in the office. Do you have any advice or perspective on that given your remote work experience?
I mean, I do spend a lot of time in the office in Raleigh. I was very purposeful that the company that I chose was in the same time zone that I'm in and somewhere I can easily reach and be at. I have had an apartment in Raleigh. I've spent so much time there at certain points, and I think it's critical, right? I actually love the freedom and flexibility of working from home, but I absolutely hate being alone and being on Zoom. And so for me, I try to get out a lot. And sometimes that's going to visit customers or going to conferences. And sometimes that's going to the office. But I'm not sitting around waiting for my boss, our CEO, to ask me to come. I'm not sitting around and only coming for the executive cadences of, monthly or quarterly meetups and planning. I'm going on a Thursday, and just hanging out with the team and seeing who wants to have dinner that night. And then when I am home for extended periods of time, because that's what family or life requires, I make sure I get a lot of time with people I know and respect in my community, like you, Andrea. Like, go for walks with you, go for walks with Catherine Cook, like, go for walks, grab a glass of wine with someone. And so for me, I think it's equally important when I am home that even though it might not be the people from my work or my real job, these are people who help me take my career forward, help me make hard calls, and I make sure to get in real life time with them as well.
No, I love that, and I think how much I support that because I feel like we sometimes put too much faith in digital, and the reality is nothing can replace relationships and that face time, and so whether it's building that with your team and with your leadership, whether that's building it in your own personal network and friendships, I mean, it's that connectedness, that ability to look at each other face to face, to go for a walk and talk, like, I just feel like that remains such a core part of relationship building and team building and culture.
I do too. And I understand the freedom to work from home is nice. We all appreciate it sometimes. I get it, but it can't be all the time. And I think that, especially people who are younger in their careers or making career changes, there's no Zoom that's going to give you that connectivity and that conversation that you get in person. And I think it is so important that we prioritize that in real life time for businesses, but also for our own just personal development and happiness.
Yeah. No, and for those around us as well. Well, before we wrap up, I'd love to talk for a moment about your grandmother, who I'm very sorry recently passed away, but it's my understanding she was 103.5, and I know that point 0.5 meant a lot to her. But I also know that you have referred to her to me as quite a legend in your family and someone who was really a source of inspiration for you. So, can you just take a minute and as we think about women that I want you to know, it sounds like your grandmother was someone I definitely would have wanted to know. So, just give us a little bit about her.
Thank you for bringing that up. And you're right. Dee Dee, as we called her, or Dorothy, is someone that you would have wanted to know. And I think all of your listeners would have wanted to know. Dee Dee grew up, my grandmother, in India in the time before India seceded from Britain and grew up in sort of a British household and had a lot of support, had a love of music. She went away to boarding school and eventually became a music teacher. She also, funny enough, made the Olympic team for field hockey and was such a strong woman. And then she met my grandfather, who was in the Army Corps of Engineers. And she got on a boat and came back to America knowing absolutely no one with no support and showed up in America, with her husband and that's it, and built a beautiful life for herself. And, people often ask me and ask her what is like secret to longevity. And, we're all sort of chasing what she had, which was a beautiful life. She was very healthy up until the end. She has shot less than her age twice in golf.
Oh my
Yeah. I mean, just a great athlete, and she will tell you that the secret to life was community, being engaged with people, whether that's through your church or through other communities that she was in, balance of physical movement and healthy eating. She was not a perfect eater. She was not a size 4, but she always said, if you stop moving, you stop moving. And so that continuous movement, I have hilarious videos of my sister and I and my mom in her little apartment. And this is when she was 103, her making us do our leg exercises. And she would say, like, you got to keep those legs slim and trim, and making us do our leg exercises. And she'd say, I get up out of my chair without help 5 times a day just to make sure I can still do it. And so I think like she just lived a beautiful life of strength in a time where not as many women were being brave and strong and making those kinds of choices, and of overall just mental and physical wellness that was really, really special.
She sounds amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I have to believe she probably influenced your love for the outdoors and your love of movement, because I know you love to walk and hike and ski and all the things. So obviously that trickled down and had an influence.
For
Well,
sure, for sure. And
thank
I
you again
hope
for sharing that.
when I have enough time, maybe I can be as good at golf as her one day, but I don't have enough time to put into it, so I'm pretty terrible right now.
Well, if you need a coach, my husband puts a lot of time into that, so I'm sure he'd be happy to help you. And he's got all the video equipment to film your swing and give you some pointers. If
I love it. I love it.
well, thank you so much for sharing your journey and your experience. I would love to encourage listeners to go and check out Hard Calls on Apple, on Spotify, wherever they listen to podcasts. I think from the interviews that I've heard you do, you can learn so much about leadership and about those difficult decisions and about how to lead through some challenging times. So, love what you're doing on that platform as well. But thank you very much for everything, Trisha. This has been so much fun.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for investing your time to have women share their stories and encourage other women, and everything you're doing to uplift women and helping them be successful. So thank you.
You are welcome. And for our listeners, Women I Want You to Know is also available on LinkedIn in some editorial series. Trisha was one of our early profiles. You can find that at the Women I Want You to Know page. And please drop a review, tell us what you thought, and thank you for listening. Thank you for being here today and sharing in this inspiring story from Women I Want You to Know. Please leave a review and share this episode with another woman in your life. And join the conversation and connect with us on LinkedIn and Instagram, and keep fueling the future for female founders and leaders. Thank you.